Hi guys, thanks for coming. And we are starting our OTT about accessibility in web design. It's our second OTT about accessibility. So if you missed the first one has more content about this. My name is Bruna Dannenhauer. I'm the product designer here at White Prompt. What is accessibility? This was on our first presentation about this. Accessibility is the measurement of users' ability to use a certain product or services, and that extends to the ease of use of each product, that how they can achieve their goals by using it, right? And it's meant for everyone, and accessibility is it's not something for just permanent impairment people. Disabilities can be permanent, temporary, or situational. So when you plan on accessibility, you will achieve a larger number of users, right? Because you can have a permanent disability, a certain population, but when you think about temporary or situational disabilities, like in this example, you can reach a larger number of people. And it benefits all. You don't need to think about only with people with disabilities, but for example, when people have a different cultural background, or when the person has a very variety level of proficiency in technical matters, it's also something about accessibility. Or when you think about different age groups, like elder people, it's also accessibility. So thinking about that, it benefits all of your users and make your product richer and usable for a larger number of people. So the principles of accessibility are the poor principles, right? So that means perceivable. It means the interface needs to be presented in a way that the user can understand it, disregarding the disability. It can mean presenting alternative texts for some images, for example, or allowing transcript of videos, simple things like that. Operatable means that design should be developed in a way that users can interact it, regardless the tool they use. So if a person can navigate only using keyboard because they have some mobility problems, or if the person has like a problem with seizures, for example, for someone that has that problem, also is something that you should keep in mind. Understandable is the principle that if the user understands the information and the components that are in your project, it means you need to use clear language or use a certain hierarchy of content, so it's perceivable and understandable for everyone, or clear error messages, things like that. Robust means that your content needs to be interpreted by a variety of agents of usability, like screen readers and things like that. So you need to well structure your HTML or CSS and other technologies, so those agents can deliver the information properly. It means almost you need to think about it being usable by not only current technologies but future technologies, so you can't close it up too much. If you use it, just Alexa, for example, is something that can be not accessible because it will only rely on someone that can hear, and people with speech impairments might not be able to use it. So I separated some practical tips so we don't just keep in theory about this. So let's dive into it. For example, consider cognitive diversity That means you need to create your project thinking about users with cognitive impairments. So you need to use clear headings and avoid overwhelming visuals. The next example is how not to do it, because here in this example, we have lack of hierarchy and people that have dyslexia or kind of a lack of attention problem might not use these very well. Second tip is to implement skip navigation links for people who use screen readers, right? Because that helps someone that relies on the keyboard to skip and jump repetitive navigation, go to the main content directly. Like in this example, if the person is using a screen reader, you hide, of course, it won't be visible for regular users. You hide a skip to content button and they will skip the menu in your project. So they can go directly to the content. That's important for projects where the people are going to access it over and over. A focus on pronunciation and text to speech. It's trying to use phonetic spelling for complex terms. For example, if a name is too complex to be spelled in lowercase, you could type it in a uppercase so the screen reader read it letter by letter, and that you can use it in favor for that or counter that, like text. If you spell that word on uppercase, it will read T-E-X-T instead of the text word. So you need to think about the context and see what's better for your project. And this example is how screen readers see the hierarchy of contents, right? So it will read first the news, then the hurricane, then this subtext here. And dyslexia-friendly fonts, it seems like an odd tip, but if your project really needs and focus on accessibility, that's something important, because users with dyslexia can have problems by rotating letters and changing them from place and so on. So when you have a typeface that helps users with dyslexia, you can make their lives easier. So there are fonts that are specifically built for that, like this font here, Open Dyslexic, because every letter is unique, and people with dyslexia have problems with fonts that are like the O or the P is too similar to the D or the B, and because it's just flipping the letter and so on. But you have more common fonts that are good as well, like Arial or Courier or Verdana, and some others like Trebuchet and Calibri. Support multiple languages, that's something else that's accessible and not very commonly taught, because when you have a project that has a global audience, translation might not be very accurate when you're using Google Translate, something like, of course, Google Translate is already a very good tool, but for when you have a different culture, you can read it in different order and think about things in different way. Or even when you overlay the text over a picture, sometimes the text cover the picture, and that's something that makes the design and the product hard to use. So this is a good example, like booking. When you the left one is English. When you select Hebrew, for example, it changes the order of the button, it changes the layout and the adjustments of things, because they read in a different way than us. So it's more accessible this way. Optimize for slow internet connections is another great tip, because oftenly this is something that people don't think about. But it's for example, it's very important to consider areas with slower connection, like middle of roads or or some distant places, because then you can reach more people to use your project and your design. That's especially important when you're using emergency service. So that's important. And optimizing images is something that people usually don't think about. And this is one example that's in our, let's say, daily lives. So HBO Max kind of, when they launched, had that problem. The images for the thumbnails were too big for slow connections. And sometimes old TVs or someone with a smartphone in a faraway place couldn't even load the thumbnails images. Imagine reaching the video content. So this is a comparison about those 4 platforms. And you can see that in this case here, they had a much larger image and people really complained about it. And well, here's the difference. Keyboard friendly dropdowns. That's another tip to ensure that the dropdown are navigable through keyboard, because sometimes when you do it wrong, the keyboard just go through the menu and not open it when you are using just the keyboard. So it's important to think about that because of keyboard users only. And this is an example. And in this example, when you press the tab, it will open the menu directly, and there's a correct way to do it on code. Sorry for not presenting the code example, but I know there are a variety of ways to do it properly. Accessible icons, that's something that's also not very common, because when you use an icon, you need to think about the situation of it. So using hidden labels to describe the content might be a good idea, and choose, of course, an icon set that's understandable and visible, that's and readable. It's very important. But you need to keep accessibility in mind when you're building that, because here are 2 examples. When you use the icon alone, it's important to have an alternative text, because screen readers will just read that as to indicate the person who is blind, in this case, what the icon does. But if your icon is just a decorative icon, they don't need to have an alternative text, because then you will send or give the information twice. So in this right example here, if you could put an alternative text like home, and the screen reader would read icon, entire home, icon, location, great location. So it would be repetitive information, and that wouldn't aggregate nothing for people who use screen readers. So the left example is it's a good example of when to use alternative text, and the right example is when you should hide it, because it won't deliver any more information about it. Focus order and tab index, that's a basic tip as well, but it's important to ensure that the tab order is correct and deliver the information in the proper order, so they are navigable and understandable, right? And these achieve the natural flow. For example, this is a correct way of doing it, and the right one is a bad example. It depends on how you build your code. SVG accessibility is our last tip, because usually people forget to do it because it's not an image like PNG and JPG, but it also needs to be understandable by screen readers. So this is a way of doing it, and I found out there's 10 patterns you can use it to make it more accessible. So if you want to know more about it, you need to search for that, because otherwise this talk would be too long, right? But this is a good example how to do it. And lastly, about accessibility, we need to keep in mind emerging accessibility challenges. That's something, it's also a good thing to be brought up, Because, for example, when you build a page with single page applications or web applications, if you don't build it properly, screen readers won't be able to use it. Or if you don't do the responsiveness properly, you only test your application in your browser and with a pointer, and you don't really use your phone with your finger to do it. People that have small phone and large fingers won't be able to use it. Some projects that only rely on voice UI could be also an accessibility problem, because people that have speech impairments or they are deaf won't be able to use it. Or some projects that use augmented reality or virtual reality usually are not very accessible for people that can't rely on the vision to do the user navigation, right? So thinking about alternatives when your project is focused on one of that is also thinking about accessibility, right? And that's it. Any questions? Thank you all for coming, and that was our talk about accessibility.